Díomh a cóide agus fáilte rais. Hello friends and welcome back to the Cray McCree podcast. It's Michelle Lane Nagul. I am Elaine Doyle and it is with deep, heartfelt gratitude that I welcome you back to this sacred space. How are you getting on? Yeah, I really hope everyone is keeping well at this beautiful time on planet Earth. And before I get stuck into today's topic, I really just want to send you so much gra, so much love right now from these beautiful, magical, sacred lands of Gunday Kerry of County Kerry. I quickly want to remind you all of how amazing you are doing, that you are an answered prayer of your ancestors. You know, our ancient ancestors prayed for a time when the children and people in their lineage would remember their divinity and the ancient wisdom of this land and start to live from their heart centers once again. So no matter where you are on your path, I'm just here to remind you right now in this moment that you are the answered prayer. You are doing way better than you could ever imagine. So just inviting you to stop being so hard on yourself and to be proud of yourself and to really, really love yourself, because that's what this time is all about if we break it down really simply. Yeah, I love you. I am proud of you. The ancestors are so proud of you. So yeah, just allowing that in this moment. The love consciousness. So when we're in this, now that we're in this loving space, and before we dig into today's episode, yeah, I'm just inviting you all to take that sacred journey now from your head down into your sacred heart. And perhaps just taking some deep breaths here. Allowing yourself to seep down into your holy vessel that is your body. To come out of that stress response, that doing energy. Yeah, and just open the doors of presence, receptivity, and relaxation. And just allowing yourself to receive that which your soul came here to receive, and taking what you need and leaving the rest. So yes, welcome again to this sacred space. It is the 17th of August, 2024 here in Ireland. And we're in Lunasa, which is the Irish for August. And Lunasa being one of the Wheel of the Year celebrations, one of the fire festivals, is a time of harvest and celebrating our inner and outer harvest. And perhaps that's why I started off this episode with, just some love and proudness for our journey, because that's what Lunasa is all about, is this taking some time to pause and reflect on what we are harvesting since Samhain. What seeds have we planted? So, inviting you all, to reflect on what you're harvesting at this time of year. I actually uploaded a Lunasa meditation and activation onto my podcast, which you can listen to, which I would recommend listening to up until the autumn equinox, because the energy is still with us. So anyways, today's episode, yes, this is a topic that I've wanted to talk about for quite some time, and it is the path of uncertainty. So for anyone who is, and I'm sure most of the listeners here who are walking that heart-led path, or that healing path, that soul path, walking the spiritual path, whatever you want to call it, when we're on that sacred path or journey, it means complete uncertainty. And I'm sure throughout all my podcast episodes, I have brought that in. I've weaved it in. So I'll be repeating myself at times, but I just felt it was so important to dedicate a full episode to this topic, at least one. So let's see what comes true on the path of uncertainty. Nothing is certain, so who knows? And it reminds me, I never really know what exactly needs to come true until I sit down, because the soul loves uncertainty. Because if I was certain about what I was going to speak about, I'm blocking the flow of my channel, of spirit coming through, of the guardians and ancestors of this land coming in and sharing their wisdom. And I'm going to quote some John O'Donoghue again today. I've been reading him this morning, and he talks about that. To come into the rhythm of our soul is to fall into that flow of spirit, and to just open ourselves up to be a vessel. And that means being okay with uncertainty. And it reminds me, I remember when I started running women's circles online during COVID, and I would have my set plan and I would be preparing for hours and I'd know exactly what I was going to say. And yeah, it took me a while for my masculine energy to trust my feminine energy, to trust the uncertainty, to trust that I knew what needed to come true in that moment without needing to prepare. And like all topics, the more I come into contact with God, spirit, creator, whatever you want to call it, the more I realize that I don't want to be here to necessarily preach, because every soul's path is so unique and so different that what works for me might not work for you. But I just want to share. So instead of preaching, I just want to share my stories of moving from needing certainty to the magic of living a life of complete uncertainty, and the magic that has brought into my life. So that is my intention, to just share the musings from my heart. Cray mo cree, the earth or soil from my heart. So I'm just going to start by referring and reading out some quotes from John O'Donoghue's amazing book, Anam Cara. So in many of his books he talks about this, but specifically in the book Anam Cara, about how the soul loves uncertainty and spontaneity. So I'm just going to read out some quotes from John's book. Good old John from Clare, very much Celtic Christian. So your soul knows the geography of your destiny. Your soul alone has the map of your future. Therefore, you can trust this indirect, oblique side of yourself. If you do, it will take you to where you need to go. But more important, it will teach you a kindness of rhythm in your journey. And to me, what I get when I read this is your human body wants to have certainty and take charge and know where you're going to be in 10 years or 5 years, right? But your soul, if we embody more of our soul, that has the map of our future. But it requires following our soul and taking courageous, uncertain action, which I'll share my own direct experience of this. Some other quotes from his book. Spontaneity is one of the greatest spiritual gifts. To be spontaneous is to escape the cage of the ego by trusting that which is beyond the self. So uncertainty requires spontaneity, right? And it is to escape the cage of the ego that wants to know, the ego that's afraid, by trusting that which is beyond self. So when we take uncertain, spontaneous action, we are trusting God. We are trusting God's plan for us. Okay? So we've got uncertainty, spontaneity. And one more final quote for now. Familiarity can be a quiet death. An arrangement which permits the routine to continue without offering any new challenge or nourishment. So what he's saying is familiarity, too much familiarity in our lives can feel like a quiet death. And it prevents us from any new challenges or nourishment. Okay. So I just wanted to create some foundations for why I'm speaking into this topic, the path of uncertainty, because I suppose what John's referring to here is taking uncertain action, being spontaneous, being comfortable with being comfortable with the unfamiliarity of our lives allows us to embody more of our soul, more of our destiny, and allows us to grow and evolve. Okay. So let me share my own journey on this. And what I'm brought back to is, I can vividly remember it was 2020. Okay, it was December 2020. And the pandemic, whatever you want to call it, hadn't hit yet. It was probably happening in other sides of the world, but I had no idea. I didn't watch the news. And I remember I was living in Doonanall, Donegal, on the Wild Atlantic Way. And a couple of friends had come up to visit me for New Year's. And it was New Year's Eve. And we went for, it was New Year's Day actually. And we went for a New Year's Day swim in the ocean. And we were setting our intentions for the year ahead. And I remember vividly saying, I want to become more comfortable with uncertainty. I can vividly remember that because, I'd left the day job in August 2019 and I had absolutely no certainty, but I wasn't overly comfortable with that. So I knew, as the months went on, that I had to become more comfortable with that. And what a powerful time to set that intention, because everything that happened in the world after that was complete uncertainty. We didn't know what was happening, how long things were going to go on. And I remember just like sitting back in my chair and like, this is all good. I'm really comfortable in this uncertain place that humanity is in. And as I reflect on my journey over the past 5 years, since that time where I set that intention, I realized that I had a lot more work to do to really melt into this way of being, this comfortability with uncertainty. And just to say, I suppose, uncertainty is a feminine archetype or a feminine archetype or a feminine energy. So I would have talked about this before, where right now, this time of mass awakening, what's happening is the divine feminine energy is coming back alive again, which has been shunned because of the patriarchy and all these different reasons. The feminine energy is coming back. And the feminine energy resides within both men and women. We are actually meant to have a balance of both energies. And feminine energy is softness, stillness, trust. And one of them, archetypes, is uncertainty. Okay. And I feel like for most of us on the path, what we were actually trying to do as we awaken to our souls and the divinity and truth of who we are, one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to unplug ourselves from the collective consciousness. So when I say the matrix, I feel like the collective consciousness is a matrix in itself, where it has all these fear and lack mentalities, okay? So over the past few years, I mean, there was so much fear. And a lot of us woke up because we were like, this is not the truth of who we are. We don't need to live in fear no matter what is happening. And one of the collective unconscious patterns is this need for certainty. Okay, so if we're coming into this soul-led heart path, I feel like one of our things is to unplug from the collective unconsciousness of needing certainty in our lives. And for a lot of people, this plays out by, and I even see it in the spiritual community, of, being afraid to step into unfamiliar territory because they want certainty and security in their lives. So it's like, I'm just going to stay in this house that isn't my dream house because I have certainty. Okay? Or I'm going to stay in this relationship because it's safe and it's certain and I have security within it. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, but when they're stopping us from really, really, really living our highest timeline, that's when it's a matrix concept and it's unconscious. So people look for certainty within their relationships, within their work environment, within their living environments, relationships, and yeah, it can really, really dampen the soul when we're staying in relationships or situations or jobs because of certainty. And this is something that I'm, still really trying to embody. I might have said it last year, in the last episode, I nearly went back to the day job just to have some certainty around income. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but if it means we're selling our soul or going against our soul, that's when it can be an issue. So lots of people stay in jobs for certainty that that's the income to pay the mortgage or the rent. But what we're blocking is our soul work that might bring us in even more income. Okay, so that uncertain path can actually lead to way more abundance than ever before. Okay. So coming back to my own journey, it's like, if anyone listened to my podcast episode about living off grid and embracing solitude, I think that was the episode where I mentioned, I can't remember the quote exactly now, but it was like, the happiness that we are seeking, or the magic that you are seeking or looking for, is in the thing you are avoiding, right? And I was referring to something else, something else in that episode. I'm going to refer to something else now, which is the magic I was looking for, right, was in the thing I was avoiding, which was moving to Kerry. So for anyone doesn't know, I recently moved to Kerry. If anyone had asked me what am I most scared of, I would probably say moving to Kerry. So here's a secret. The thing you are absolutely most afraid of is the thing that will probably bring you the most immense joy. That is a fact. Well, it's not a fact. It has been a fact in my life. So it was exactly 10 years ago. And I was home from Australia on holidays. And my dad had insured me on my old car while I was home, but he had to insure me for the whole year. He couldn't just insure me for 2 months. So I was like, oh, Jesus, I better make the most of this. And I said, right, I'll do my first ever solo trip around Ireland. And I came down to Cork and Kerry. And I remember coming down to the Ring of Kerry and just absolutely having an awakening to the magic of this land of Ireland. I'll never forget the moment down in Valentia Island. And since then, I've been coming back to Kerry, and anyone who knows me, went to college, anyone I did my master's with or worked with over the last 10 years would know how much I love Kerry, like absolutely obsessed. And, you know, over the years, I've looked at houses, I've looked at land to buy, and anytime I came down here, I was like, oh, I don't know, like it's very isolated. And, there was an uncertainty about it, like a massive amount of uncertainty because, you know, there isn't family close to me. Like I'm 5 hours from my family, which as a Taurus is very important. And most of my network is on the East Coast. So Kerry has brought me to my absolute edge because it's uncertain. I don't know. There's no certainty down here, really. And there's no family, there's no safety or security in the external, in a way. There's no one I can say, I'll just go, I'll pop over here, you know? And I cannot describe how much my soul is at rest now since I took this massive leap into the unknown, into the uncertain. It's really hard to put into words. And here's a really probably random example, but like since end of 2020, I experienced getting up to PE during the night a lot. And that wasn't something that I would have experienced much at all before that. And for years, I've been trying to figure it out what has led. Sorry, I'm just pouring myself some tea here. An Irish woman needs her tea at all times. I was always wondering what has led to this getting up to pee during the night. And since I moved to Kerry, that stopped. Not completely, but mainly. Like it's reduced by 90%. It's actually a really good example because it shows how when we're not following our soul's calling, we'll feel unrest or uneasy. Oh my goddess, I can't believe it's taken me this long. But at the same time, there's a divinity in the timing because and if anyone's been down here, especially when it's cold and wet, it really can bring that Kolyak energy of stripping you bare and exposing your deepest shadow. So I totally get why I'm not here till now because it has taken me a lot of self-development and remembrance to be able for it now. And I see how at different points over the last few years, I have surrendered into uncertainty and been really comfortable with it, and then had a fear of it, which I want to talk about, right? Because this is interesting. Sometimes we think that, on a bar chart where it's going up and down and up and down. And sometimes we think on the spiritual path that we're just going up and up and up. And sometimes we fall back down like an alcoholic has a relapse. So I've had lots of relapses over the past couple of years, which I'll speak into now. Yeah, and I think, I don't know, one of my recent podcast episodes, I talked about how technology, me being around technology is like an alcoholic being around loads of alcohol. Okay. That is just too tempting. And this has just come true now, is that me being around really unconscious people all of the time is like an alcoholic being around alcohol, and what I mean is I actually very unconsciously absorb their consciousness, which then clouds my own decisions and consciousness. And I have to say, this is actually quite scary for me to admit, because I didn't really want to admit that at the time. And I was reading a book recently, actually, and I've heard this term before, that you are a sum of the 5 people that you spend the most time with or hang around with. A man actually said it to me, fado, many years ago, and that made me finally leave a very abusive relationship. And when I read that book recently last week, I was like, okay, over the past few years, I've actually been on a very spiritual path, but I still have actually spent a lot of time around the collective unconscious energy through my family of blood. Family of blood. And I suppose this is a sensitive topic for me, because I absolutely love my family of blood, especially as a Taurus, right? However, if people aren't on this path of consciously choosing new belief systems, new ways of being, birthing a whole new earth, there is a certain level of unconscious energy there. And even though I wasn't interacting with my family of blood necessarily a lot on a day-to-day basis, because I was living in the same environment, I really believe that I was actually absorbing their consciousness, their unconsciousness, unconsciously to myself. I must have been, because I can see how I actually really went down. And I would have had, over the years, different healers say this to me. You need to relocate, because you're actually picking up the unconsciousness from the energies around you, and you're seeing the world how they see it, not how you see it. And look, this is what's just coming through in this moment, right? And I don't know if it's possible as sensitive beings, and you'll have your own view of this, but I don't know if it's possible to be around people all of the time and not pick up their consciousness or ways of being. If you just imagine yourself in a room, a small room, for a month with somebody who's completely negative and sees the world in a very distorted way, how would that affect your own consciousness or vibration? That's it on an extreme level. So healers were saying this to me, and I was having many conversations with my friends who were also living on their ancestral lands, and we were like, look, the mastery is to not take on that consciousness and to grow and evolve through being met with the exact opposite, which I did in many ways. And I have absolutely no regrets, okay, because I do believe you can really grow through the exact opposite being projected onto you. And maybe I've spoke about this before as well, is how when I was on my ancestral lands, and Kilkenny, actually all of my recent ancestors are from there, I was able to see where my wounds and traumas have come from, which is powerful because awareness is the first step in healing. However, a point does come where that's complete, and then now all that's happening is you're taking on those lower vibrations or unconscious energy. And I do believe that this is why a lot of healers and medicine women and medicine men live in the likes of Costa Rica and places, because they've actually physically had to relocate away from their family of origin because of the collective unconscious energies present in their families. I really do. Now I kind of understand it. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have to have a beautiful, loving relationship with our family, because that's important, especially as Irish people. And I've noticed that since I did move away, I left Kilkenny last year, nearly a year ago, that my relationship with them has actually improved massively, absolutely massively. And I notice that I'm way more myself, my spiritual, authentic self around them now, because number one, I think when you're living at home as an adult, it just can be very straining on a relationship with parents. But also because I'm not absorbing their distorted energies, it's more easy for me to be myself now. And when you're more yourself, your relationship with that person will improve. But I think it comes down to boundaries. If you feel there's a collective unconscious energy within your family of origin, boundaries, space, and boundaries. I feel like down the line, when I have children and a family, if my own family, it's going to be like, when people are coming into my home, these are the rules. There's no complaining of any type or racism or judgment, because this is my house and my rules. And I think that's how it would work for me going forward with my family, is like, bringing them into our world and having boundaries. So I feel like I'm going off on a bit of a rant here, but just trusting the uncertain flow of the soul. But seeing how exposing myself to that energy too much pulled me away of being comfortable with uncertainty. So I'm going to give you some examples here of when I really was able to step into uncertainty. Leaving the day job for a start. I was in a senior position in one of Europe's busiest hospitals. I was on really good money. I loved my job. I loved the people I worked with. I just hated the system. I honestly don't believe any woman is meant to be working 5 days a week. I really don't. Not when we have a womb and we're in 4 different seasons in 1 month. So I trusted the uncertainty of that step. And then the next big one was in January 2021. A family member said, if you don't get the V, you're going to have to move out. And I was like, I would literally die for this cause, so I'm moving out. I think it could have been the middle of lockdown. Maybe it wasn't lockdown, but it was winter in 2021. And I packed up my car, and I had absolutely no certainty about where I was meant to go, because I booked an Airbnb in Achill for the month, and he messaged me last minute, the owner, to say, look, they're not allowing anyone new to the area right now because of, and I was like, okay, well, there was a women's circle in Wicklow at Avondale Retreat, and I just knew that was the next right step, and that I'd find somewhere to live from there. And I just think back to the courageousness of my beautiful self back then. Like how courageous I was and how beautiful that was, because it allowed me one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, which I'll share now, which was I went up to the circle at Avondale Retreat and had a beautiful time up there. It wasn't my first time up there, and I just said it at the circle. I was like, if anyone knows somewhere to live, I'm looking for somewhere. And Interestingly enough, there had been a woman living in the basement of Avondale Retreat, and she had just left and moved to Achill Island, where I was meant to go but didn't go, and that her apartment was now available. And I lived there for 9 months in a retreat centre during the pandemic. And it was absolutely bliss because there was a community of people living there, all in close proximity. And we had the most divine time of our lives. Like, it was just so magical. And because we were in a circle of women and men, we were able to just heal an immense amount. And I remember just having so much connection with the ancient ancestors of this land, the Tuatha De Danann, going to Glendalough when it was empty. It was one of the most profound experiences of my awakening, because I realised stepping away from the family matrix, stepping into a spiritual community who loved me and seen me and knew my power when I didn't even know my own power, allowed for so much sovereignty, self-development and love to enter my being. And there's just absolutely no way, lads, that I could have planned that. Like, you can sit at home and look for somewhere to live, but it just doesn't work like that. You have to just get out and take the next right step and trust that uncertain path. And I remember my dad being like, I can't believe you're packing up your car during a pandemic and not knowing where you're going. And like, you should see the apartment I was living in. It was absolutely incredible. Like, it was just something out of like a villa you'd see in Bali or something, do you know? When I say a basement apartment, it really doesn't do it justice. So what I'm trying to show you is the magic that happens when we take the uncertain path. So this could be a long episode, but I'm going to keep going. There's a lot to come through yet, I feel. So many times after that, I continued to follow the uncertain path, right? I went to Scotland, I stayed there, and I really felt, after the 9 months in Wicklow in Avondale, I really felt like I was meant to move to Scotland for a while. So I went over at Samhain, packed my car, did the exact same thing, and followed my heart. And I remember going up to this Airbnb, and your man was a deer hunter, and it was all divine. They were speaking Scottish Gaelic and singing music, and we were drinking whiskey and everything. And they were like, we have a cottage that we can rent out to you for cheap for the winter. And I was like, here it is. This is it. And I absolutely got very, very scared. I thought, I was up near Aberdeen. I wouldn't have known anybody up there. It was winter. And I was like, do you know what? This doesn't feel overly nourishing. And I got on the ferry back and I moved back in with my family. I didn't go back to Wicklow. I moved in with my family. I was so rattled after the time in Scotland. Right? So what I was learning was taking heart-led action, following our soul, is extremely important. But sometimes I wasn't doing it in the most nourishing way, if that makes sense. So it's very different moving to Wicklow in January, which is an hour and a half from where I was living, than moving to Scotland approaching winter. Like in Wicklow, it was coming towards the end of the winter into spring. So I think that was a wake-up call that, like, because I have a womb, it's very important to, and not because I have a womb, I have a body, a human body even, that like taking on certain action needed to be done in a more nourishing way. Because I probably didn't explain it enough, but I was really, really rattled leaving Scotland. It just sounded like wouldn't be the right time for me to do that. which I learned this year moving to Kerry in the summer, which was perfect timing. So I don't know how each person gets the balance between following your soul, stepping into uncertainty, but doing it in a nourishing way. It's very individual to each person. And there's a very fine line between, is this unnourishing or am I just afraid? Which is it? Is this fear or intuition saying it's not the right timing? I think that experience, and look, I have a big backstory with Scotland where I had fell in love with a Scottish man and we were madly, deeply in love. I was meant to move there with him, but then we broke up. So I was in Scotland without him. So I was like, I don't want to be here without him. So there was a lot of grief there as well. So just a bit of a backstory there as to why I was so on bits. So that was 2021, and I think it's taking me that many years till now to figure out how to really take uncertain action, but from a rooted, grounded place. So this is key. If we take uncertain action from a non-grounded, rooted place, we're not necessarily going to attract those divine situations. You know, I do remember leaving Kilkenny, going to Wicklow, feeling very rooted and grounded in myself, and I wasn't bleeding. You know, I was a good place in my cycle to do that. So it's very important to take grounded, rooted action. And that's taken me years to really be able to do, because even the situation in Wicklow was I moved in with different people. I knew the path in Wicklow or to Kerry was going to be a bigger mission, which required more embodiment, more groundedness, more safety and security within myself. So there was many times over those years where I did move back in to my family's home, which was just perfect because at the time there was land where I could grow vegetables and there was apple trees and a rose garden, and it was perfect setup in order for me to connect more with the plants and the trees and the vegetables and the earth. But there was many times on that journey where I knew my soul wanted to come back west or wanted to leave. And because I was becoming more centered within my body and my womb, I realized that there wasn't the physical energy there to actually take this leap into the unknown. And so it was this, I had to then become comfortable with the uncertainty of not knowing when I was going to be ready to take this big leap. So that's another part of it, is like becoming comfortable with the uncertainty of not knowing when we're going to be ready to birth our new life into creation. And there'd be many times where I'd maybe come down west and I'd put the word out there that I was looking for somewhere, and if it didn't manifest with effortless ease, I wasn't forcing it, because I knew the right place would align with effortless ease. So what I was trying to do over the past few years was to not force things. And I think this is really important, that there's two ways of getting what you want. You can bust your arse and hustle for years or months or however long to get what you want. You know, people work their arses off to buy their dream house or whatever it is. Or you can actually sit back, come into union with God, come into the consciousness of trust and surrender, and wait that these things will come with effortless ease. Not when you think you're ready or when you think you need them or you want them, but when God and the universe brings them to you, when you're actually ready. So this is one of the biggest parts of the path of uncertainty, which is like your ego has to take a fucking seat, right? And trust that which you need will come to you. But we have to be patient. and trust. I mean, that's my way of viewing it. If you want to hustle and work hard for what you want, that's your path. I knew, because I'm a priestess, that a lot of my mission is about bringing through the divine feminine mysteries and consciousness and energies. And a part of that is trusting, surrendering, and living in that place of uncertainty. Okay, so that's why it's taken me years to get back west, because it had to come from a place of effortless ease, grounded and rooted and centered within my body. And, you know, I wish, if there was one thing I would wish I'd known, was that, Elaine, it'll all come to fruition soon. It mightn't be when you think or when you feel it has to be, but just trust, you know. And I remember being out one sunny afternoon with my dad planting vegetables, and I think he was getting anxious about the fact that I was 35 or whatever, or 34, and that I was still living at home. And he was like, where do you see yourself in a year, Elaine? Like, where do you see yourself? And I was like, I was like really panicked. I wish I had just said, probably just here chilling, like remembering the ancient wisdom of this land, because I knew I would have still been there in a year's time. I just knew. I probably said this before, but when I left the day job in 2019, I knew I needed years to recover. I knew I needed years to catch up. I needed to play catch up, because my soul wanted to fucking leave the matrix for a long time and wanted to remember the ancient wisdom and my divinity. So I did a lot of catch up, especially because I was starting to attract people who'd been on the path for 10 years. So I was like, I need to catch up, like, to be a vibrational match for my soul tribe. So I said to him, yeah, I see myself in Kerry. Little did I know it would take me. Yeah, that was a timeline, but it was going to take me longer than he wanted it to be. You know, and I can see how delighted he is now that I'm here. So he was bringing in that collective unconscious energy of certainty and where are you going to be in 5 years and we need to know and all that, right? It's kind of like trusting God's plan, knowing that timeline is there. So I wish I had been able to, and he was just reflecting back to me, my own consciousness, I wish I'd been able to melt back in to that place of surrender a bit more during those times. So a really important concept here is surrendering. So I know what my vision is, my dreams are, but I need to surrender to God's plan. And that's what the line means in the prayer, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Thy will be done. The will of the universe and God will happen. So it's thy will over my will. The universe has a better plan for us. And trust in that. It's really letting the ego sit down, because the ego is the manifestation of the collective unconsciousness. It's very fear-based. So it's allowing that to sit down and say, I trust. You know, my mom, God bless her, is like, I don't know if you'll ever meet anyone or have kids. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to hand that back to you, because I completely trust God's plan, whatever that is for me. You know, whatever that is for me. And I have to say, since I came down to Kerry in July, it's like my spine has got a little bit taller and my chin has gone up a bit. And there's a deeper trust with my plan ahead. I think a part of me as a woman who really feels it is a massive part of my mission to birth children into this world has been unconsciously waiting for the timeline of the husband and the children. And I've just really let go of that. And I don't mean that I'm not open to it and wanting it and desiring it. Of course I am. But they say, you know, speak your wishes and let them go. And I feel like I've really let go of that, an attachment or neediness of that. Because now that I've followed my soul again, it's like, oh, just trust and surrender to God's plan. So the big important things are trust, surrender on the path of uncertainty. Okay, so where have I to go now? So there's an amazing movie on Netflix called, sorry, I nearly ate my microphone there. What is it called? I don't know, but it's about, I'd really recommend watching it. It's I was at a period during spring where I was so over always doing spiritual things that I just watched Netflix for a week, and it was so relaxing for my nervous system. And I was very mindful of what I watched, because you can really seep into unconscious energy there. But it was about this, it's based on a true story about a young Australian woman who sailed the world on her own. This little boat. And she survived. And like, if you've watched the movie, and like, you know, I don't want to ruin it on people, but she nearly doesn't make it. And I was living with my partner at the time, and I remember thinking, I used to be like that. I used to be fearless. Like, I travelled the world on my own. Packed up my car and moved to Wicklow. Like, I used to be fearless. When did I become afraid again? And I think this is where I was talking about the collective unconsciousness of my family of blood actually seeped into my consciousness, and I became afraid again. So just putting that out there, that actually that might have happened a lot of us the last 5 years since the pandemic, where there was probably 95% of the collective consciousness, or the collective people in the world were in a state of fear. Right? Whether justified or not, it was still, my experience, a consciousness that serves no purpose, only causes disease and havoc. So unless we were really extremely careful with our energy, we actually unconsciously absorb that. Now, I was never afraid of the things they were afraid of, but I really do feel I actually unconsciously absorbed it, and I think many of us maybe did in different ways, but that's for you to decide, really, not me. Just pouring some more tea here. Have to keep hydrated with all this talking. I met a woman who listened to my podcast, a beautiful American woman. Hello to you if you're listening. And she was like, how do you talk for so long on the podcast? I was like, absolutely no bothers to me. So yeah, watching that movie, and I just cried and cried and cried, and I was like, oh fuck, I got to step into that fearlessness of that young woman. I can't remember the movie, but if you Google that much young American or Australian woman who sails the world, you'll get the movie. And I used to care what people think, you know, and I think living back on my ancestral land really did bring in unconscious energies to my being, which is just a vibrational match. Like, I was soaking them in because they were still inside of me too. So I'm not blaming them either, you know, like I wouldn't have lived there if there wasn't a vibrational match there. Okay. And this is it, like, you know, we have to be very kind to ourselves. We're the first generation to do this amount of healing in thousands of years. So yes, we think we've sorted something out. We think we've healed it. And actually there's a whole fucking iceberg underneath. And that's okay. I don't judge myself anymore. I'm like, we love these parts back into wholeness instead of judging them and chastising ourselves. And I would have shared, you know, I did move to Wexford last year with my partner at the time. And even that was overcoming fear because I'd never lived with a man before. And I remember my godmother saying to me, she's like, don't be afraid to make mistakes, Elaine. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I was like, right, I'm just going to move in with Johnny, and if it works out, it works out, and it doesn't, I'll grow loads. And fuck me, did I grow loads. And I'll be eternally grateful to him and his soul for the healing that he brought me and the love that he showed me. So that in itself was overcoming uncertainty. However, actually, I think just on that, oh yes, just on that, what my godmother said, don't be afraid to make mistakes. This is another quote that I wrote down from Anam Cara. Frequently in a journey of the soul, the most precious moments are the mistakes. So, when we're following that very uncertain path, that unknown path, we will make mistakes and we'll get it wrong. But as John O'Donoghue said, some of this, on a journey of the soul, the most precious moments are the mistakes. So, I had to be completely okay with Kerry actually not working out, and I don't know how long I'll stay here. But it was the next right step, So it's okay to make mistakes, and I'll get to more of that in a minute. But another aspect of the collective unconsciousness is I was talking to a beautiful woman down here who helps people relocate to Kerry, and she said, I've been helping people move here for years, and a family came down, but they only stayed 2 years, so yeah, it didn't really work out for them. And I was like, sorry, excuse me, they stayed here for 2 years. That's amazing. Like, who says it has to be forever for it to have been a success? Like, that's unconsciousness, I didn't care if I only stayed here for a month. I knew I had to live in Kerry for a period. And one of the best things I ever did was live in Donegal. And that was 3 months, and that completely changed my life. So the next right step doesn't have to be forever. I actually don't even like that term, The only thing forever is our soul, really. Everything else will fall away eventually. And our connection to God is forever. So, yeah, we need to shift our thoughts around how long it needs to be in order for it to be a success. If a relationship is a month long but it changed you, then that's a success. It doesn't have to be forever. And as I move deeper into the consciousness of love, I realised that I'm not hard on myself now about the mistakes that I make, for that's where you grow the most, So being okay with taking an uncertain step and it being a complete mistake. It's better to try than not try at all. And it's even like that, to me, is not what I'm trying to get at. It's actually more so that, like, if you take uncertain action and it's a mistake, it's not really a mistake, because that's the lesson your soul wanted you to learn. So everything is a stepping stone. And I'm specifically talking about moving and finding a home, but this for you might be a job or a relationship. So just, whatever way it resonates in your life. Yeah. So just tuning in now. Where do I need to go next? Okay, so there's lots more to come through. This might be one where you pause and come back later on to listen to the rest. So just coming back to when I was in Wexford, from the very start of my relationship with my ex-partner, I was talking about moving west, that I needed to move west. And there was a healer that I used to go to, and it was last July, and she was like, West is calling you. And I was like, I know. And my partner was very aware of that, and I actually, I was looking for jobs on the West. That didn't happen, so I didn't, I then chose to move in with him and stay in Wexford, which was beautiful and part of my path. But this exact week last year, we actually were down in Dingle together, and I was like, I have to live in Kerry for a while, So there was always that thread there over the last year and the last few years. So it's important to say that this is something my soul has been calling me for a very long time, and that's probably why I'm not weeing as much during the night and different things are happening magically, because that's what happens when we follow our soul's calling or nudges. So that gets me on then to, when I took a break there, I just checked my messages, and my friend was like, the synchronicities are just the norm now. And it reminded me of the magical synchronicities that happen when we take the path of uncertainty and the path of our soul, which I want to share with you all. So for any of you out there that are still in a place of renting or looking for your own home to buy or land, it's very important to step outside of the collective unconscious energy, especially in Ireland. Even spiritual people can get tied up in the narrative, and so did I, that it's very hard to find somewhere to live, there's nowhere to rent, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and I really have struggled with this myself. I feel like I've always found it hard to find somewhere decent to rent, even in Australia. And I knew it was ancestral trauma because I grew up in this beautiful home on a beautiful piece of land in Kilkenny. So I knew it was ancestral trauma because my mum has done a lot of family history, and the likelihood is that my mum's family were kicked off land during the famine, and I moved to Kilkenny then and luckily got a piece of land. But there's this, because of our wounds of colonisation, the land been taken from us, literally taken from us by English landlords, having to pay rent. Like, even when my family did own the land, they still had to pay rent to the English landlord, and they could come on and take their plants and crops and veggies whenever they wanted. That there's been a big wound with home and displacement. So that's the word, displacement. And if you're the healer in the family, you're going to feel all these ancestral wounds. Okay, so, and I'm still overcoming it, but that led to me really being tied to this collective unconsciousness about home. And I knew I had to overcome this to move to Kerry. And it's hard to describe unless you're Irish what it's like here when it comes to the housing crisis and everything, and there is. But as a spiritual person, you have to overcome that for the greater mission, which is to have a beautiful home and land so you can serve humanity. I need a priestess temple, you know what I'm saying? I need a retreat centre. I have to overcome all the fucking shite, like. I have to have the dream to birth heaven on earth. And luckily I have people in my life who've got to that place where they have the land, so I've been learning a lot from them. And I remember my friend who has a beautiful piece of land been like, you don't seek it, Elaine, you trust, and you open yourself up to being worthy for it, and then it will arrive. Okay, so that's another quote I'm going to read out by John O'Donoghue. There is so much blessing and beauty near us, which is actually destined for us, and yet it cannot enter our lives because we are not ready to receive it. Our lack of readiness is caused by fear, blindness, and a lack of self-appreciation. So there is so much blessing and beauty near us, which is destined for us, but we are not ready to receive it. And that's what my friend was always getting at, was it's just out there in the field, and you just have to open yourself up to it. You have to be ready to receive it, and you have to be worthy of it. He says here, a lack of self-appreciation, which is worthiness. Okay, so in Ireland, with all these narratives around housing and home, we really have to rise above that and go, I am worthy, and I am open to receiving the blessings and beauty which are destined for me. Now, I'm still working on this. Trust me, I'm still working on this. And that requires surrender, trust, and taking on certain action. Because when we take on certain action that our soul needs us to take, that's when we're stepping into the field of the blessings and the beauty, which I'll get to. So, you know, there was months that I was preparing to move to Kerry, and I kept saying to my friend, I can't go yet because it's coming from this desperate, needy place. This like, oh, I'm homeless and I need to find somewhere to live. And like, it was so, I was rattled. I remember being at, was it a Beautana gathering? Beautana gathering, and I was with my friend Deirdre and Kathy and different people and crying. I was like, I just feel so, I feel homeless. I feel abandoned. I have nowhere to go. I feel scared. I was fucking rattled. And thank you to Deirdre and Kathy for really holding space for me that day. And I knew that I wasn't going to attract or manifest a home from that place of desperation and neediness. Yet at the same time, I physically needed somewhere to live. So it took me months to actually come out of that desperate, needy energy and come into a place of trust and surrender. And that's where my time in Clare, living off grid, allowed me to come out of that traumatized, wounded, desperate, needy self into this woman who was now more connected to the land and to God and to spirit, and knew, like, it was only 5 weeks I was there, but I was away from internet connection and people, and I had deep solitude, and I just, like, my spine got a bit longer, and I was like, oh my God, I'm a priestess, come on, I can do this. So I suppose, you know, living at home with my family and then living with my partner, they were buffering this core wound. They were like safe options that were preventing me from being stripped bare, right? And I needed to be stripped bare to see the core wounds about feeling needy and homeless and everything. I needed for that to be stripped bare, to take a leap away from those scenarios, heal that person who felt abandoned and needy and homeless by taking away my stabilizers or my safety nets, heal that part hurt me, so then I could go out on my own and be independent again. Okay. So really grateful for that time in Clare. So what I'm saying here is the path of uncertainty, or the soul heart-led path, this is not for the fucking faint heart, because I really felt like I was on a slippery slope at the edge of falling into insanity at times. Like, I was, if anyone's done plant medicine ceremonies, like, I felt like I was on a tightrope between sane and insane. So just make sure you're really supported if you're going to be taking massive leaps into the unknown and removing all your stabilizers and safety nets, people. Yeah. So, So I knew then from that place, I remember leaving Clare going, this vision to move to Kerry or somewhere in the southeast, southwest even. Now I'm ready, because I've done more of the healing work, and I've really stripped myself back and seen the core wounds. He brought healing to them before I take this big step. Let me just take a breath there. So, in moving to Kerry, right, this is kind of, maybe I've explained it already, but because I was really working with my cycle, at the time I was still bleeding every 22 days, every 23 days, I had a very small window where I could take physical action and try and do my work and tend to all life admin things within a 2-week period, really, because I would stop for my bleed. That it was going to take longer than I realised to finally get to where I need to be. So again, surrender, trust, letting the ego take a seat. So what I tried to do was, could I look up somewhere to live from the east? So then it wouldn't require as much physical time and possible exhaustion, because like moving, like just even, it's not like I could drive down to Kerry and view somewhere and drive back home and stuff. So a beautiful woman called Anita. I don't know if anyone remembers, I put it on my Instagram stories that I was looking to move west if anyone knew of anywhere. And I got a bit shocked because only one person replied to me, right? Out of hundreds of people who would have seen my stories. And I was like, fuck. And I realised sometimes it only needs to be one person, because that woman, Anita, put me in contact with a woman who helps people move to the area. So like, we're not looking for 100 perfect homes or 100 perfect beloveds. We're just looking for one. So that was a beautiful reminder of that. So she got on to me, and that was her getting on to me made me realise that that was the land I was meant to go to. It was Kerry. Sure, I knew that all along, but sometimes we need external validation. And that woman, Anita sent me on to this woman who did help me to find some places to view, to rent. And I came down for a few days at a time and viewed these houses. But they were not up to a priestess standard, let's just say that. They weren't, I don't believe anyone should be living in the houses that I looked to view. You know, mouldy, wet, damp. But I suppose a part of my lack mentality or my ancestral wounds towards renting and housing was calling that in. So I'm on a path to clearing my consciousness to call in more aligned priestess housing situations. I'm already manifesting the perfect home that meets all my needs, kind of thing. So I knew then, after viewing 2 places that weren't right, that I just needed to come down here and talk to the land and the wells, spend some time here and not leave until I had somewhere sorted. It's kind of like the Wicklow scenario, really. And what's changed between now and my time in Wicklow when I took that big leap of faith in 2021 is, firstly, I do feel like I, as I said, collected up some unconscious fear, energy, fear, unconsciousness, whatever, mentality. But I also how do I say it? I also became way more in tune with my body and my cycle and my womb, right? And I knew I wanted to do this when I was ovulating, not when I was close to bleeding or just after I bled. And, you know, I would have said earlier on in the episode that when I went to Scotland, it wasn't nourishing, and I was learning how to do things from a nourishing, rooted, grounded place where I wasn't needy or desperate. So it did take me years to come into this place of doing things from a grounded, rooted, centered place while honouring at the same time, obviously honouring my cycle and my womb. So that's where it's patience. We're not going to get things done like we once used to. It's not like the hamster on the wheel and constantly going. You know, we're only going to get a certain amount done in one cycle as a woman if we're really connected to our inner seasons. So I really had to surrender. Anyway, and I remember leaving the house in Clare that I was house sitting, and I was going to go straight to Kerry and find somewhere to live. And I was like, it was actually my friend was like, would you not be better off going back to Kilkenny, grounding and rooting yourself for a while and then go down to Kerry? And I was like, no, I don't want to go back home. I don't want to kill the momentum. And boy, am I glad I went back to Kilkenny for a week first, because it allowed me to go from my inner spring to my inner summer on my cycle and get some vegetables and ground myself and nourish myself in the waters and the land there before making a really massive leap of faith, because it was something that I've been working on for years to be able to do. So I then went from Clare, spent a week in Kilkenny, and then made the big pilgrimage down to Kerry, which I'm going to just talk about now. So yeah, I came down to Kerry then it must have been around the start of July, with this new sense of trust, surrender, embodiment of the uncertainty of it all. And I didn't really tell anybody. I didn't tell my family that week when I was back in Kilkenny. And I think there's a niceness to that as well. And I know John O'Donoghue talks about that, is the importance of keeping some things secret and to ourselves, which kind of can prevent the pressure. So within the first week I was here, I was offered 3 places to live. And that was it, the magic and synchronicities that come when we really take that leap. And many people have been like, oh, you won't find somewhere, people I was talking to in Kerry, and it'll be very hard, there's nothing around. And yeah, I've got offered many places since I've been here. So the story was, I said I'd camp in my beautiful Bentelt, which was a magical experience down in Kerry, until I found somewhere. And I wanted to do things in a way more nourishing way than I have before. So I said, look, I'll book into an Airbnb for the first 2 nights, because I know I won't want to set up camp after driving for 5 hours. So that was the best decision I ever made, because the Airbnb man, I said to him, he was a lovely man called Gary. I said, look, I'm down here looking for somewhere, if you know of anywhere to live. And he was like, oh, a friend of mine is renting a room. And that was it. I moved in there. And one of the reasons, I just knew it's an in-between place till I get my own place. I really do need my own place to live. But I knew until I found my feet and settled in that this was perfect. So I'll tell you the little story. I was saying this earlier on, like my friend reminded me of the synchronicities that happen on this heart-led path. So 2 of the houses I first viewed were near Usheen's Pass. I feel like my spirit baby is Usheen, and I feel very connected to Usheen. Usheen that went to Tiernan with Niamh. And I realised that Cahersiveen, the town I was camping in, and the place where I was looking for somewhere to live, is named after a woman called Sive. And mythology, Sive was Usheen's mother. So I remember feeling very connected to Sive and Cahersiveen. Felt like I was really connecting in with Sive and the mother energy, that living in Cahersiveen was going to help me mother myself and become a mother to Usheen one day. So I was really feeling Usheen and Sive and Tiernan and all this ancient mythology. And I'd even happened to get some wild salmon, which is like, haven't had it in years, like it's very hard to get. And I was eating my wild salmon outside the tent and having a great time. And one evening, this man, his dog comes up to my bell tent. And a lot of the time I'm like, really like being in my own energy, but something told me to come out of the tent and talk to this man. And he said to his dog, come here, whatever his dog's name was, come here and we'll talk to Finn McCool's wife. And I said, sorry, what did you call me? And he said, Finn McCool's wife. And I was like, oh my God, Finn McCool's wife is Sive, by the way. Finn McCool is Usheen's father. And I was like, that's mad that you say that, because I've been really tuning into Sive and Finn McCool and Usheen since I came here. Now, he wouldn't have been a very spiritual man, but he just laughed. He was like, oh, that's mad. And then he said to me, the campsite was on, had live music every night. And he said to me, come in later on and I'll sing you a song. So I went in later on. And he's like, I'm going to sing a song, and this is for Sive, which was me, obviously. And he sings me a song about men and a street called Barnashridia. And that was the street that I was moving to, which is on the edge of the town in Cahersiveen, on the it's on a mountain. So he sings me a song about the street that I'm moving to, and he didn't know any of this. So that was that was the synchronicity and the message from Spirit that I needed, that I had made the right decision. And since then, since I've come to Kerry, I have so many stories of synchronicities happening. So I want to share more of those synchronistic experiences, because when I share them, they remind me of the importance of sometimes less is more. So the less we try, the less we seek, the more magic falls in our lap. And honestly, men and women, I am still learning this. And luckily, there's people in my life who have mastered it. So I've been learning from them. And remember, like my friend trying to bring me into that consciousness. But it just took me ages to figure it out, because you can't intellectually figure it out, actually. It has to be felt in the body. So just, being patient with yourself, that it'll take you as long as it takes you to come into this embodiment of surrender and trust. So an example is my parents happened to be down holidaying in Kerry, right near where I was living, which is divine. And, that was another divine sign. And we were out, and I was saying, now I really would love to find somewhere to run retreats from down here. I need to bring women down here. It's so magical. And I was saying I'll have a look. And as we were pulling out of the car park from the restaurant, a car pulled out after my parents. And my parents went to their B&B, and I drove on, and this car that had pulled out stopped to watch the sunset, and I did as well. And we got talking. And she was a beautiful woman who's deep on the heart-led path, who happens to be doing up a house to rent out for retreats. And I was like, it literally can be that easy. Like, I could have spent hours and days looking for somewhere. So I actually went to visit her house last night, which is just absolutely spectacular. And it's just, divine, in the middle of the hills near Usheen's Pass. That would be perfect for retreats. And there's more magic to come there. But it's just another reminder that, like, sometimes we need to do less. And there's a possibility of me living in that house if it's in the highest alignment, because they go away for the winter, and it was like, this is somewhere that would really be a priestess house. And it's that reminder that, like, saying no to things that aren't in full alignment and trusting the uncertainty that something better will come along, because I did get offered a 3-bed house in Waterville, which is a location I would love, but it just had no fireplace, and it just wouldn't be as close to nature as I would have liked. And I was saying to my friend yesterday, I'm like, am I being picky? Should I say yes to this? Because it's actually a really beautiful house, and it's really warm, and it's new, and I was like, it's a no. And then a couple of hours later, I get offered this beautiful house for the winter, which, we'll see what unfolds there. But it was like, that's 1,000% more my vibe. And it just shows that when we're looking for something, whether it's a man or a job or soul work or a place to live, you'll possibly be met, you'll possibly be tested, where things will come in that will nearly be close to what you want. And Spirit is usually testing us to see how much we'll stay true to what we really want, what we're really worthy of, and what we really need, and what's in full alignment. So I was talking about that last night. I was like, I nearly said yes, because I wanted certainty. Because that house in Waterville would have been till next May or June. And I wanted that certainty, but I knew something didn't feel right, because it's not the priestess house that I need. So in saying no to that other place, then magically something better was offered. And that's what uncertainty brings, is like, if you say, like, know your nose, to know your nose, so K-N-O-W, know your nose, N-O. Know your nose to make room for the yeses. is really important. If we say yes to something isn't in alignment, we're blocking the blessings that and the beauties, as John O'Donoghue said, that are near us and that are destined for us. So like my perfect home is already out there. I just have to make sure I'm saying no to what isn't in alignment and trust the uncertainty of it all. Another synchronicity, which I'll share as well, was I was like, right, I've met lots of people since I got here, but I'd really like to meet some younger people my own age who are on the path. And I was like, oh, I'll have to go to a yoga class, which I'm not really into yoga, or I'll have to do this, start, and the other, and I should do this, and I should do that. And then I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to do what I really want to do tonight, which is I really want to go to the sauna. And I went to the sauna, and I was like, okay, well, there's no one really here that. Yeah, I kind of had a feeling I was going to meet someone on my wavelength, but I'd surrendered to the fact that half an hour had passed and I hadn't. And then all of a sudden, I'm sitting in the sauna in Ballinskelligs, and I see a guy that I know years who's from Cork. And I thought I'd missed him because I thought he'd left. And then I walked over to him. I was going to say I ran, but I actually didn't run. And I was like, Kieran, hello. And he was like, yeah, I moved here. I've took over the cafe here. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. The tribe is here. You know, he's totally one of the tribe. And he told me about a WhatsApp group with young people in the area and stuff that was happening. And it just happened that easily. Like, you don't have to go out and hustle. You know, the people you're meant to be with will cross your paths when you simply do things that you love. And for me, it was the sauna. And on the way to the sauna, it was funny because I've seen this piece of land for sale that I wanted to go and view. And before I went to the sauna, I was like, maybe I should go and view the piece of land instead of going to the sauna. And I was like, no, Elaine, you're hustling, like, just stop it. And I didn't even know where this piece of land was. I had a vague idea of the area, but like, I don't know, Kerry. And would you believe, on the way to the sauna, I passed it. And I was like, oh my God, there it is right there. And this was in the middle of nowhere, down our like road with grass nearly in the middle. But I happened to pass it, and I looked at it, and I just realised I literally don't have to seek at all. I'll just stumble across things when I need to. And it was funny, before that I was actually handing out little notices in shops to find somewhere to live, because down in places like that, that's the way to do it, because I really need my own place. And then I got offered somewhere last night by just following my heart. Like, I even felt like I was probably hustling, putting notices up, even though that has worked really well for me. So it's like, it's knowing how much aligned action to have, and when we've crossed that path and we're now hustling and we're seeking and we're trying too hard. So it's a fine line. So I'm still, friends, like, I'm still really trying to figure that out, honestly. But if there's anything I've really, really learnt from my time in Kerry, is that the less I do, the more magic comes. The more... See, when you're following your heart and you're doing things you love, that's when people cross your paths that are in the highest alignment. And it's honestly, it's been waves of that, where I've done that and then I went into fear, and now I'm back in that. And I think a big part of it being in the flow of that again is because I'm on the right piece of land. You know, I didn't have as much things like that happen to me when I was on the east, because I wasn't where my soul really, really wanted to be. You know, so it's just lovely to be back on that really synchronistic, heart-led path. And you know, we won't always experience those things in our lives, and that's okay, but it's just so lovely to be on that path again. And it's taken an awful lot of courage and healing to be on that path. And just another thing, and I'll be finishing up soon, I feel, because my throat's getting what would we say? Not tired, but another thing I want to mention is with the path of uncertainty, taking uncertain action, there is still a certain level of structure that I needed. And that's what I was learning. That's what I learned by connecting with my womb. So an example of that is, so I'm going to take a leap of faith into the unknown by going to Kerry. But creating the structure of having the Airbnb booked before I left Kilkenny was a certain amount of certainty. I knew where I was going to be staying for 2 nights. And I actually didn't know what campsite I was going to be on or anything, but I knew I would be nourished by then. So before, I would have just not booked an Airbnb before I left and would have done it when I got down there. But I'd learnt my mistake that, like, if I'm on my own, I'm known to share the driving with, I'm wrecked after 5 hours driving, I need to already have booked somewhere. So, like, depending on where your energy level's at, if you're a woman or you're a man, knowing that, like, creating some structure is actually really needed on the heart-led path or the uncertain path. And that's where we have the balance of divine masculine, the divine feminine. The feminine wants to be in the flow, but the masculine creates that holding and that structure. And that was really what I got from my ex-partner. He showed me how to do things in a more flowy way, but with a little bit more structure that actually really helped my feminine, because the feminine needs structure as well. We can't be just off flowing all the time in complete uncertainty. We need some structure with that. So I'm learning to get the balance of the ebb of flow, uncertainty, and a little bit of structure around it, if that makes sense. That's actually really important, because when I was in Scotland, there was too much, there was lack of structure. Not having anywhere booked and just going from place to place was very unnourishing for my womb. So we're allowed to have clarity and structure and a certain amount of certainty. You know what I mean? That's a part of it as well. And I hope that doesn't sound contradictory. Yeah, we need what we need. It's just making sure we're not falling into that fear and that need for certainty too much as well. So it's a fine balance, it's a flow. And just a little bit more on that, just one final thing on that. I remember following a friend on Facebook who had went travelling recently and had absolutely no plans and was just booking place from night to night and really following their heart, and they're very much on the path. And I remember just being in awe of it. And at the same time, you know, I would have done that years ago when I was backpacking, just went, just trusted my heart and loved the synchronicities and magic that happened then. But realise now, because I'm of a certain age now and very connected to my cycle, that I would, if I was going backpacking again, I'd like a little bit more structure around, you know, not having to be out in the streets at 10 o'clock looking for an Airbnb to stay in. So it's like how one person does the uncertain path will look different for you depending on your physical body and where you're at on your path. You know, so there's no rules with it, but it has to feel really nourishing. You know, so if I had come down to Kerry straight from Clare, I hadn't grounded first in Kilkenny, I tried to set up my bell tent after 5 hours of driving, right? I wouldn't have been grounded in my body. I would have been exhausted and disassociating, because that's what happens to me when I'm doing too much and exhausting myself and burning myself out, right? And I realised if I'm not in my body, if I'm not grounded, how am I going to find a home? When you're not in your body, you don't attract the right people, places, homes. You actually attract the opposite of what you really want. So it's very important, I really want to stress that, to do it in the most nourishing, nurturing way that you can. And if you're still here, thank you for still being here. I knew this was going to be a big one. So apologies if I'm repeating myself, but I feel like I didn't perhaps finish off this thread earlier on where I was saying or that I said I'd come back to. Maybe I didn't say it out loud, but I definitely said it in my head to myself around. So I was talking about attempting to move to Scotland around Samhain. And I was talking to a friend about this, and I was reflecting on it deeply myself, that big moves like that, right? Moving house, moving country, whatever the big thing is for you. Maybe it's changing jobs or whatever it is, big life changes. It's so important for us to attempt as best we can to do them in sync with the seasons that support us with big moves. So for example, like after I attempted to go to Scotland at Samhain, my guides were like, no, Elaine, you don't try to do these things in the depths of the winter. And, this was years ago when I was still learning to really melt into and sync with the cycles of nature and the external seasons and the seasons within. And, when I reflect back on my move to Kerry and leaving Wexford, the reason why it happened so effortless was because I did it in the height of the summer, just after the summer solstice. And that is a time of, it's where the divine masculine energy is at its strongest. And the divine masculine energy is the sun, the life force energy. So this actually is the perfect time, any time really from Bealtaine to Lunasa is the perfect time to make big changes in our lives, because the support in the external is there. And even, I remember being in Scotland and it would get dark at 4:00. So when you have many things to tend to when you're making big moves, the light isn't on your side. So I was able to have the longest days possible supporting the big changes. So this is really important. And I suppose with that, if we are really going to live a life that's in sync with the seasons and only perhaps take big action during the summer and things like that, we have to really slow down and surrender. And I think, all this talk about sustainable living, and I talked about this in one of my recent episodes about, sustainable living, the most important thing is sustainable living within us and nurturing and nourishing our bodies, and go slow and taking slow, grounded, sustainable action that isn't going to burn us out. If when we tune into the seasons and take action when it's really supporting in the external, yes, it slows us down, but that's really sustainable and good for us. So what I've learned massively this past year is not putting so many big life changes on the to-do list. One big thing a year. And even like my to-do list for the month, just when I'm finished bleeding, it's like it really is simplifying it and putting one or two things there, So this is probably about this is probably another podcast episode, but how do we really live sustainably? And again, this is just my experience as I am recovering from extreme burnout and living most of my life in flight or fight mode. So take what you want and leave the rest. And while I'm here on this topic as well, I also want to share this. And again, I might have mentioned it before, and it's probably a bigger topic that deserves its own episode. So let's see what needs to come true in the future about it. But, I've mentioned obviously the move to Kerry, right? And I honestly feel like I'm a 23 or 4-year-old right now who has just left home for the first time. Because I've been completely reborn into a different person. So I have found it extremely difficult to figure out how I was going to support myself and be independent while undergoing a massive transfiguration, metamorphosis, awakening. Like, I really, really, really hadn't a clue because I was so tired, so drained, so traumatized. You know, when you wake up to all the bullshit in the world, it's very traumatizing, right? So it's taken me years to figure out how I could do it in a sustainable, loving, nourishing way. So I do feel like I'll talk about this perhaps more in depth in the future. But I really just wanted to mention it here as we're talking about my path to move into Kerry and the uncertainty of it all. Because, you know, I lived independently for at least 10 years. I was doing very well in my career, renting houses in Australia, living on my own, sharing, paying a lot of money in rent, but been well able to afford it, traveling the world on the income that I was making. However, like I was completely dissociated, not in my body at all. Working 9 to 5, in flight or fight mode, burnt to a crisp, while volunteering in the evenings after work. So I couldn't hustle ever again. So I had to learn, how do you survive in the world as a woman, make an income, be independent, and not go against your body or your womb or your cycles or your inner seasons? And girls, women out there, I'm still trying to fucking figure it out, honestly. But I'm doing amazing. Like, amazing. I'm very proud of myself, but I'm still learning. And I suppose when I was in a relationship, recently, that was so supportive because we were able to support and nourish one another. But when you're back on my own, I've had to simplify my life again. I've been having takeaways once or twice a week, because I just haven't been able to. I can't do everything for myself when it's just me, you know. So just simplifying my life again and figuring it out. And like, you know, there's friends of mine who have been self-employed their whole life and have known how to be independent and make a living for themselves while very connected to their body and their wombs. But like I had never done it before because I was completely disassociated in the day job. So that's why I feel like I'm leaving. I just like feel like I'm in my early 20s and I'm starting out again. The big difference is I'm awake. I'm in my power and my sovereignty. I'm becoming even more connected to my body each and every day, coming out with that flight or fight response. So it's a whole new way of being in the world where I haven't really had a whole lot of reference point. So that's why you'll see my journey. It's like I'm really starting from scratch. So yeah, I really just wanted to share that here. And I suppose really, when I reflect on what I just shared, it's a reminder that in itself is an uncertain path when we're going against the grain or the norm, where we're not hustling anymore to look after ourselves. When we've been reborn into a new self and we've never done things so grounded and loving. It's a whole new way of being in the world, and that's uncertain. And honestly, lads, I'm learning day to day, you know, like what's hustling and what isn't. How much guided, grounded action do I take, and how much do I just do nothing and say what I want out loud and know it will manifest? So I'm learning on this uncertain path each and every day. And it's beautiful and magical and intense and hard. To finish up soon, and I wanted to share the quote again, right? So there is so much blessings and beauty near us, which is destined for us, and yet it cannot enter on our lives because we are not ready to receive it. This lack of readiness is caused by fear, blindness, and a lack of self-appreciation. However, when we are ready to receive the blessings and the beauty, the door of the heart becomes the gateway to heaven. So when we finally shed the fear and are worthy of that which we need, when we take the leap of faith into the unknown, honestly, lads, there is so much magic that feels like heaven waiting for us. You know, Kerry is known as the kingdom, God's country, and I feel like I've stepped into heaven. Like, you know, of course, I have my days and my moments, but it's like, wow, this is where my soul needs to be. And if you've followed my journey over the last few episodes, you'll know that I nearly felt like I was dying, like I had a shamanic death. So I'm not saying that the path of uncertainty and spontaneity and unfamiliarity is easy. No, I'm not saying it's easy. But what I'm here to say is that it's absolutely worth it. And it's actually vital for your spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being. You know, my physical health, as I said, is my bodily functions are improving, the weeing during the night and the calmness in my nervous system. So it's vital for our well-being to do the thing that scares you the most. What is scaring you the most? What are you most afraid of? What things that are very uncertain in your life that you're called to do? What unknown path is calling you? What certain things that you feel are bringing you security that you actually need to let go of? Because those things are holding us back. And we need to shed those false senses of security and certainty to make space for what actually sets our soul on fire. You know, we're not here for a mediocre existence in this powerful time on earth. You're here to do what absolutely sets your soul on fire. And you're worthy of that. And it's out there in the infinite possibilities. It's just allowing yourself to receive it. And that is why the soul loves uncertainty. Because that's where the field of possibilities lie. And, you know, just to say before I finish up, I'm not an expert in this. I'm an Irish woman doing her absolute best to climb out of the ancestral pit of trauma that I was born into. I'm doing my absolute best. And so are you. And thank you for loving me, supporting me, witnessing me, and joining me on this sacred journey of the heart and the soul. Sending you all so much love from the kingdom, from Gunda Kerry, from County Kerry. And until next time, Slán go fóill agus slán agus banach de cóide.